They were known as the Magnificent Seven, an unlikely group of men thrown together who created one of Britain's best-loved comedies, Dad's Army.
Don't tell him, Pike! Pike!
It appeals to everybody, and it was a part of the time where everyone was working together, part of England.
You stupid bug. Don't panic!
Together, they shared a unique camaraderie. But behind the laughs lay stories of sadness.
He'd really seen the dark side of the war, and that probably gave a bit of an edge playing Lance Corporal Jones.
Of bizarre scandals.
It was a great relationship until she found somebody else and we all lived under the same roof.
I took the blame of Hattie's marriage, but I didn't take him away. It was the other way round.
And of hidden rivalries.
There was this real tension on set which they somehow miraculously managed to not bleed into what they were doing professionally.
Through behind-the-scenes home movies and the stories of those who knew them best, this is the secret life of Dad's Army.
They were very naughty boys and getting a lot drunker than they ought to have done and having a wonderful time.
We reveal how one of the cast's most loved members fought a long battle with money.
Throughout my childhood, it was very much a hand-to-mouth existence, constantly worried about whether or not we could pay the gas or electricity bill or the rent.
How a life of excess led to tragedy in the ranks.
I knew him quite well, actually, and it was very, very sad when he went. Far too young.
And how for some, fame was bittersweet.
He once said to Jimmy Perry, "You know, Jimmy, it's an extraordinary thing. I played all the great classic roles, and now I've become a household name doing this rubbish of yours."
I'm all right, Joe.
Dad's Army has kept us laughing for the last 50 years. With its blend of memorable characters,
Bringing that gravy around, Joe.
and iconic catchphrases.
I think those characters are universal, and of course they've now become totally burnt into our national psyche, really. I think that everybody can see their own granddad, their own uncles, their own fathers in there.
They were butchers and they were bakers and they were bank managers. These were sort of ordinary people doing an extraordinary job.
The Dad's Army story started in the summer of 1967. Actor and theatre manager Jimmy Perry was struggling to make a name for himself on television, so he decided to turn his hand to writing.
Jimmy was working primarily as an actor. He was desperate to write for TV and create a good part for himself.
Perry decided to write a sitcom based on his time serving in the Home Guard during the war. Made up of volunteers, their role was to act as a last line of defence in the event of a Nazi invasion. With resources scarce, the Home Guard were poorly equipped to fight a rearguard action against the Germans.
There was no equipment. They had a little armband and they were making their own weapons up, pepper sprays, Molotov cocktails with a bit of petrol in a glass jar.
The lack of military equipment led the Home Guard to be dubbed the Broomstick Army and inspired this classic scene in the pilot episode when Captain Mainwaring tries to commandeer Private Godfrey's weapon.
Excuse me. Mr. Mainwaring would rather like to have your rifle. Who would like to have it? Captain Mainwaring. But he can't have it.
Now look here, Godfrey. Hand over that gun at once.
I don't see why I should.
Are you refusing to obey an order on active service? Realise we could have you shot for this.
That'll be a bit tricky since he's the only one with a gun.
However, Dad's Army might never have made it to the screen, but for a fortuitous introduction. Jimmy Perry's agent, Anne Callender, put him up for a role in a sitcom called Beggar My Neighbour, being produced by her husband, David Croft.
David Croft was a sweetie. He was very quiet, very charming, and he was one of the nicest directors you could have ever worked with.
When Jimmy Perry showed David Croft his script, he immediately saw its potential, as Perry explained in this 1989 interview for the BBC's Daytime Live.
I was fortunately on one of David's shows and I chatted over with him and he was very enthusiastic. Unlike a lot of directors, they always put you down and say, oh, I don't think so. He was marvellous. And he said, oh, this is fantastic. And we got together and we sold it to the BBC in 4 days and it's one of those marvellous stories and it all came together.
The BBC initially commissioned 6 episodes, but they didn't like Perry's title, The Fighting Tigers, and insisted it be changed to Dad's Army. In a revealing interview for BBC Two's You Have Been Watching in 2011, Jimmy Perry explained how he and David Croft went about writing the show.
The first series, we wrote more or less together, and then he got me to write some, and he wrote some, and a bit of a mess, actually, you can tell us all. So we finally got to a situation, I said, Dave, there's only one way to do this, face to face. So we both wrote by hand with a lovely felt tip pen, and then we'd have the rough script, and then we'd sit there, and then we'd act it.
But if Dad's Army was going to be a success, casting the lead parts was crucial. The story of how the Magnificent Seven ended up in their roles is full of surprising twists and turns.
I think with most sitcoms, they really arrive on the screen with as much down to luck as judgment. And with quite a few of the roles, there were some doubt in terms of who they wanted and who they could get.
One of the most critical casting decisions was finding someone to play the part of the platoon's second-in-command, Sergeant Wilson. The BBC were keen on John Mesurier. His son, Robin, says he revelled in his reputation as one of Britain's busiest character actors.
It wasn't a question of, earning lots of money. It was a fact that John liked to be working, basically take any work that was offered to him.
But according to Mesurier's third wife, Joan, initially he was lukewarm on the part.
He didn't see the point in it. It seemed rather dull. He just thought it was going to be a boring old thing and it wouldn't last. He thought it was going to be a flop.
His agent negotiated a higher fee and Mesurier eventually agreed. Croft and Perry gave him free rein to make the role his own, and the rest is comedy history.
You got all that? Yes, I have. Right, stand by. All right, standing by. Fire! It's all right, Sergeant. It's all over. Sergeant! Exciting, wasn't it?
Yes, I suppose, if you like that sort of thing, yes. There's no need to snatch it like that. Don't snatch it.
He turned to Jimmy Perry and said, James, how would you like me to play this part? And Jimmy Perry said, well, just play it like you. And that's what happened.
There was something so refined and suave about him. He used to have the buttons slightly undone on his dress shirt and he used to have his sleeves slightly turned up. And every time he gave an order, it was sort of like an invitation, as if he was at a drinks party. And he generally assumed this sort of wonderful, benign air of helplessness, which was absolute perfection.
But just as he was beginning his time in Dad's Army, John Mesurier was enduring one of the most painful periods of his extraordinarily turbulent life. Joan had embarked on an affair with comedy legend Tony Hancock, Mesurier's close friend and one of the biggest TV stars of the 1960s.
He never got angry. When I had an affair with Tony Hancock, he understood totally because he was a friend of Tony Hancock's and he loved him. And I can't ever remember him being cross, except once in a pub. Somebody called me a tart because I had been with Tony Hancock. And John, for the first time in his life, stood up and gave this man a real rousting of how dare you talk to my wife like that. And I was very proud of him.
Incredibly, it wasn't the first time Le Mesurier had been forced to take a backseat in his own marriage. His second wife was Hattie Jakes, famous for appearing in the Carry On films, often as a no-nonsense matron, as seen in this memorable encounter with Kenneth Williams in Carry On Doctor.
Matron, please, I'm not that kind of doctor.
Don't deny yourself, Kenneth. We've wasted so many years. This is our moment of fulfillment.
But I don't want to feel full. Fulfill. You don't understand.
In real life, Hattie Jakes had embarked on a passionate extramarital affair with a car salesman.
John Le Mesurier was a very stoical man. When he discovered she was having an affair with a younger and very handsome man, he just tried to put up with it. There were no tantrums, there were no rows, there were no clashes. He just got on with his work and left her to get on with hers.
Astonishingly, Le Mesurier even let the other man move into the family home, while he moved into the spare room. Their son Robin became accustomed to the unconventional domestic arrangements.
It was a great relationship until she found somebody else who became kind of like a second father to us, and we all lived under the same roof, which was kind of, some people can't understand how that could work, but it did somehow.
John Le Mesurier.
When Hattie Jakes was chosen as the subject of one of the BBC's most popular shows, This Is Your Life, Le Mesurier glossed over their private arrangement with a public tribute.
So there's never a dull moment with Hattie, in fact?
No, there isn't really. I would like to say that I am eternally grateful to the way she runs the home, looks after the children, looks after me. The home comes first, really, I think I'm right in saying.
I mean, when he was saying that, my mother's lover at the time was staying at the house. And in fact, he even drove her to Shepherd's Bush Empire, where I think it was shot.
Thank you, John Le Mesurier.
In another stranger-than-fiction twist to their story, Le Mesurier found love again with one of Hattie Jakes' best friends. When Jakes and Le Mesurier divorced, he showed the gentlemanly qualities he was known for on screen. He agreed to be named the adulterer to protect Hattie's career and image, but in the eyes of the public, new love Joan was the homewrecker.
I took the blame of Hattie's marriage as that I had taken John away from his family, but it was not true. I was very good friends with her, but I didn't take him away from her. It was the other way round.
When it looked like Le Mesurier's marriage to Joan was also destined to fail, he was determined it would succeed. In June 1968, just a month before Dad's Army was due to air for the first time, a tragic series of events led to a reconciliation.
John was patient and waited and waited and waited, and then after Hancock committed suicide in Australia, Joni went back to John.
Coming up, the on-set differences that were kept a closely guarded secret.
The thing that is so fascinating about the Arthur Lowe and Clive Dunn relationship was that Arthur Lowe was a signed-up Tory and Clive Dunn was an avowed socialist.
And a cast member with a reputation for being as pompous as his on-screen character.
A lot of people came out asking for autographs, and somebody said no good asking him. He's a miserable old toad, he is.
More than 50 years since it first appeared on our screens, Dad's Army remains one of Britain's most loved sitcoms.
Put that gun down and listen to me.
In early 1968, most of the so-called Magnificent Seven still hadn't been cast. While John Le Mesurier, who'd been chosen to play Sergeant Wilson, was seen as natural BBC material, Jimmy Perry's pick for the role of Captain Mainwaring, Arthur Lowe, was tainted by his association with ITV's Coronation Street. However, the popular soap had allowed him to display his talent for playing officious characters with a variety of accents, as seen in this standoff with legendary Corrie character Ina Sharples.
The committee feels that it is unseemly for the caretaker of the Glad Tidings Hall to be seen entering licensed premises.
What?
They started to hire what was called at that time regional actors. And of course Arthur was from Lancashire, and he got the part of Leonard Swindley the draper and played some immense number of episodes.
Arthur Lowe's Swindley went on to have his own Coronation Street spin-off, pardon the expression, and his co-star was John Le Mesurier. But unlike the future Home Guard, John's character was clearly the one in charge.
I don't think I know Mr. Clausen, sir.
Well, I think you'd know him if you saw him, all right. He's a little bit eccentric from my point of view, but and he twitches a bit from time to time.
This scene from 1966 shows the natural on-screen rapport between the two future Dad's Army stalwarts.
I think you'll be back in a moment, sir. Back from where? From the rear entrance, sir. I'm very sorry, but I'm afraid there's been a little misunderstanding. I regret to say, sir, that I've just had him ejected from the premises.
Swindley, I think I've been doing you an injustice.
Oh, really?
I never believed all the things the Brigadier told me about you. But by heavens, I believe them now.
Well, that's very nice.
In fact, the BBC's preferred option for Captain Mainwaring was John Pertwee, now best known as the third Doctor Who. But when he turned it down, Arthur Lowe was finally offered the role.
I think it actually came down to availability in the end. It's funny how these things happen.
And so John Le Mesurier and Arthur Lowe were reunited, but now with the roles reversed. One of the most famous comedy double acts in history was born.
In view of the fact that your platoon was the first to be formed in this area, you have been chosen to act as the Guard of Honor.
Oh, that's wonderful. That's wonderful news.
You see, in the end, real leadership will always be recognized, Wilson.
Yeah. Actually, it says here that we have been chosen because we were the first platoon to be formed in the area, you see.
That would be all, Wilson, Nico.
Right. Mainwaring always feels slightly inferior to his sergeant. His sergeant, better educated and has got this very plummy voice. So Mainwaring always can lord it over Wilson through his rank, but Wilson obviously can lord it over Mainwaring just with kind of a perfectly crafted aside.
I don't want to take up too much of your time. After all, you're a very important man.
All right, I wouldn't say I was all that important. Would you, Wilson?
No, I don't think so.
With the two linchpins of the cast in place, attention turned to the rest of the ensemble. Experienced Shakespearean actor John Laurie was approached to play dour, wild-eyed Scotsman Private Frazer. However, when he first saw the script, he wasn't impressed. His reaction was apparently the inspiration for his character's most famous catchphrase.
We're doomed. Doomed. At the very first script meeting that the actors had, John Laurie was going around to the writers saying, this is a load of rubbish, this is not going to get past the first series. And that sense of being doomed, they just built that into Frazer, and as a result it really built up the part.
The role of Lance Corporal Jones went to Clive Dunn. At just 48, he'd already made a career of playing doddery old men.
And I remember one makeup lady, do you know, she said, I'm saving ever such a lot of money on Clive Dunn because he's getting older and older. I don't have to use quite so much makeup on him.
He was also very good at physical comedy. He loved music hall and he loved slapstick.
But Clive Dunn nearly didn't end up playing Corporal Jones at all.
He didn't really want to do it, but John Le Mesurier, he also didn't want to do it unless Clive Dunn did it, and Clive Dunn didn't want to do it unless John Le Mesurier did it.
27-year-old David Jason was lined up as a potential replacement. In this appearance on BBC One's long-running chat show Wogan, Clive Dunn revealed how he came round to accepting the part.
Did you say yes to that part immediately?
I'd just been in a show that I wasn't very good in, and I thought, I don't want to go in another show I'm not very good in. So I waited a minute and asked my wife, because she tells me what to do, and then I asked John the Measure, and he said, I think I'm going to do it. And when he said he'd do it, I did it, and we all done it.
With the addition of a baby-faced Ian Lavender as Private Pike, Arnold Ridley as Godfrey, and James Beck as Walker, the Magnificent Seven were complete. Bill Pertwee was also added to the cast as Captain Mainwaring's nemesis, Warden Hodges.
If you're not very careful, I shall requisition this hall for military purposes. You're too late, mate. It's already been requisitioned for the civil defence for my purposes. So get this lot out, so I can carry on with my lecture. Are you asking the army to retreat? Why not? You've had plenty of practice lately.
Bill Pertwee in real life was a really pleasant, amiable, engaging sort of individual, a real cheerer-upper, which was one of the reasons he was brought into the cast in the first place. And he wasn't really anything like Hodges.
The first series of Dad's Army was shot over the course of just a few weeks between April and May 1968. But the BBC still had last-minute reservations about its prospects. When the pilot episode was shown to a test audience, the feedback was largely negative. As accurately captured in BBC drama We're Doomed, the Dad's Army story.
I thought it was just daft.
I didn't really follow it from the start. Was that supposed to be known?
I didn't laugh out loud once.
I thought it was rubbish.
I quite liked it. I think it'll be a hit.
Some thought that a group of old men, or primarily older men, in a comedy series, would it really attract a big audience?
The BBC top brass also had other worries.
There was a little bit of hesitancy at the BBC as to whether the series would be a success. Some people felt that perhaps it was taking the mickey out of Britain's finest hour.
The BBC were worried that people would interpret it as the efforts of the Home Guard being laughed at or derided.
Despite the concerns, on the 31st of July 1968, the first episode was broadcast, including the now instantly recognisable theme tune, sung by popular wartime entertainer Bud Flanagan. In the opening few episodes, the on-screen rapport between the cast was immediately evident, as shown in this classic scene where Clive Dunn's Corporal Jones is seen handing out uniforms.
I want a small one, please.
There you are, Mr. Godfrey.
Which side do you put them on?
You put him on the right side, like that, see?
Does it suit me?
Well, if you're retreating, you've got it on back to front.
You don't expect me to stick that thing in my head, do you?
You can stick it where you like, Mr. I'm just the man that gives them out, see?
All right, pay attention, gather round.
But while the cast was gelling on screen, behind the scenes there were rumours of personality clashes.
There was this real tension on set which they somehow miraculously managed to not bleed into what they were doing professionally.
Bumbling Lance Corporal Jones often found himself the target of Captain Mainwaring's impatience.
So on the ground, strip off. We all strip off together. Right?
Permission to speak, sir?
Yes, Corporal.
It's a bit chilly out here. Couldn't we strip off inside, sir?
Certainly not. If you're cold, start running on the spot.
Yes, sir.
Right, strip.
In real life, Arthur Lowe and Clive Dunn also had their differences.
The thing that is so fascinating about the Arthur Lowe and Clive Dunn relationship was that Arthur Lowe was a signed-up Tory and Clive Dunn was an avowed socialist.
Arthur was very political and very right-wing. He had been introduced to Ted Heath and introduced to Margaret Thatcher. These are things he was massively proud of, where other members of the cast, of course, did not necessarily share his politics. In fact, Clive Dunn was as left-wing as Arthur was right-wing.
The two men avoided talking about politics on set, but when Clive Dunn was awarded an OBE in 1975, Lowe felt personally snubbed.
I think he was absolutely furious that Clive Dunn got an OBE and he didn't. I would think I would think he was absolutely crushed by that.
Arthur Lowe and Clive Dunn weren't the only members of the Magnificent Seven with their differences. John Laurie had a reputation for occasionally being as prickly as his on-screen character.
John Laurie was a lot like Frazer. He was cantankerous. He was rather mischievous. He was someone who enjoyed playing a kind of professional pessimist.
I used to be a dab hand at yourself when I was a boy.
Yes, that's rather a long time ago, Frazer.
What's up? I just hit my target just now, at 100 yards. Police beacon. Smashed to smithereens.
Great. Well, keep the thing out of sight. They'll be using Cobkers next.
Did I hear you say, sir? We'll be getting our weapons soon.
I hope so, Frazer. I hope so.
Oh, thank God for that.
Laurie and Arnold Ridley, who played Private Godfrey, were very different characters.
There was a bit of rivalry between them because John Laurie was very fit.
If he ever saw Arnold Ridley sit down, he would rush off and try and pick something up and lug it past Ridley, saying, "Don't you worry, son, you just sit there, I'll get on with this."
But Arnold Ridley's son Nicholas thinks they learned to tolerate each other.
I think they had very different attitudes to being older. I think that John Laurie probably had a little bit of fun at my father's expense, and my father didn't worry about that at all.
By September 1968, the first series of Dad's Army had come to an end. Around 8 million people had tuned in each week. A hit by today's standards, but merely respectable viewing figures for the time. However, the BBC had already commissioned a second series.
If you were able to get into the BBC and make a series, unlike today where ratings are everything, it was very likely that you would make a minimum of 2 or 3 series, which allowed stuff to bed in.
The BBC's decision to stick with Dad's Army proved wise. During Series 2, ratings climbed to around 14 million viewers, and the characters had become firm favourites with the public.
Croft and Perry were absolute geniuses. They absolutely nailed it. They got every aspect of it right. They got the characters right, but more importantly than that, they got the right actors to play the right character. There isn't a single person playing a character in Dad's Army that is miscast.
After the BBC's initial reluctance to use Arthur Lowe, he had proven himself perfect for the role. Like the other senior cast members, he'd served in the Second World War. He also adopted a regimental approach to his personal life.
Arthur Lowe in real life was probably as naturally pompous as Captain Mainwaring. And you know, writers aren't stupid. They will see a person and they will see what they are like, and they will write to type.
This behind-the-scenes home footage was shot by a member of the public during location filming in Norfolk. While the rest of the cast happily signed autographs for the locals, Frank Williams, who played the vicar, recalls Arthur Lowe refusing.
A lot of people came out asking for autographs, and Arthur was saying, "Oh, no, I don't do that sort of thing, not when I'm working." Well, in the afternoon, a lot of other people came out asking for autographs. And somebody in the morning said, "No good asking him, he's a miserable old toad, he is."
Even Arthur Lowe's son, Stephen, saw the self-important side of his father's personality.
I'd like to be able to say Arthur was a character actor, and he created the characters, and he was himself an empty shell at home, you know, waiting for a new character to be poured into him. But this is not true. He had a little bit of a pompous side. I mean, there are certain aspects of Dad's character that are definitely in the Mainwaring character.
Every great sitcom has at its heart a character that has a fatal flaw. And everybody that watches Dad's Army knows how absolutely useless in a leader capacity Captain Mainwaring is. And that underpins everything.
Coming up, the secret clause that Arthur Lowe insisted was in his contract.
That was just one thing that Dad said, no, I don't take my trousers off. I don't do those sorts of jokes.
And the real-life wartime story of one of the cast's best love actors.
Must have been awful, but he always used to say that going to public school was the most perfect training for being a prisoner of war.
When Dad's Army first appeared on our screens in the late 1960s, it emerged from a golden age for British comedy. Shows like Hancock's Half Hour had helped launch the careers of several of Dad's Army stars.
John Le Mesurier and Clive Dunn were both in Hancock's Half Hour, and that was a comedy about a man who craved this acceptance to be middle class, and we saw some of that was creeping into Dad's Army when it came along as well, with that relationship between Wilson and Mainwaring. Dad's Army seemed to have a lot of the BBC values in there. If you kind of think of the BBC as being quite middle class, quite gentle, sophisticated and intelligent humour. Over on ITV, it was sort of much more smutty. You know, you had On the Buses, Butler always chasing the birds and giving the hapless Blakey a hard time over there. And that was very much more slapsticky.
But the TV comedy landscape was changing fast.
It was quite an interesting time because obviously you've got Monty Python, you had this new wave of sort of edgy, Oxbridge-educated comedians who were all coming up. You had the Likely Lads, which was sort of very current and rough around the edges. And then sitting slap bang in the middle of it is Dad's Army.
By 1969, the BBC had largely switched to colour. Dad's Army, now into its third series, followed suit, and it breathed new life into the show.
Corporal, stay where you are. They're taking this net off. Come on up.
Don't worry, sir, don't worry. I won't let it beat me.
Come along, come. Stay where you are.
Clive Dunn's Lance Corporal Jones had become one of the most important characters, and he'd been given the show's most iconic catchphrase.
All right, don't panic. Don't panic. Where are they? I'll get them. I'll get them. Where are they? Don't panic. Don't panic.
While Jones was the very opposite of soldierly efficiency, in real life, Clive Dunn had a distinguished war record. When fighting in southern Europe, he was captured by the Nazis and spent 4 years in labour camps, as his wife Priscilla recalls.
He was caught actually in Greece. They were hoping to get to the south and be picked up by a British boat, but it never happened. It must have been awful, but he always used to say that going to public school was the most perfect training for being a prisoner of war.
Dunn had become a committed pacifist. His portrayal of Corporal Jones may have been influenced by his wartime suffering at the hands of the Germans.
It was very tough, sometimes very harrowing, and he had many bitter memories, really, of wartime. And that gave a bit of an edge when it came to his playing of Lance Corporal Jones, because he'd really seen the dark side of the war.
As one of only 3 members of the Magnificent Seven under 50, the writers Croft and Perry made the most of Clive Dunn's relatively young age.
Go and get some help.
Yes, I will, sir. I will. Don't panic. Don't panic. Right. Don't panic. You're all right.
One of the stipulations before he accepted the role was to say he wanted all of the Joeys, which meant all of the slapstick, all of the pratfalls, all of the physical comedy. He wanted to monopolise. And Croft and Perry were quite happy to let him do that because they realised that he was very good at it.
Clive was great fun. He was in for anything, would do anything. He was happy to do it. I should like to do that, sir, you know. And he would volunteer, literally, so we had to write a lot of stuff for Clive, extra stuff.
While shooting the 1971 Dad's Army feature film, Clive Dunn's comic gifts were called on again. Priscilla remembers one scene that would have had today's health and safety inspectors sweating.
We're coming! I am holding on, Captain Mainwaring. I am holding on.
He was on a horse that was on a raft going down the river, and the horse kept backing up. I mean, he'd never been on a raft on a river, and he was terrified he was going to back up. But luckily, an overhanging branch was there, and Clive grabbed it and got off the horse, and that was kept in the film.
I've got the branch, sir, but didn't seem to stop the boat, sir. I'll catch you up later, sir. We'll meet you further down the bank.
I just can't imagine that anybody else would have brought to that part what Clive Dunn was able to do. And it is an absolute masterclass in comedy character acting.
While Clive Dunn was cementing his reputation as the cast's resident stuntman, during shooting for the film, Arthur Lowe pushed his reputation for self-importance to new heights. At his insistence, a clause was inserted in his contract that specified he would never have to appear without his trousers.
And that was just one thing that Dad said, no, I don't take my trousers off. I don't do those sorts of jokes. To the point where he actually had it written into the contract. He just said, you don't need to get a cheap laugh that way.
There's a scene where they're marching down the road and you see them changing from their civvies into their Home Guard uniforms, but in between it shows you the platoon basically in their long johns and their vests. But Mainwaring is missing from that.
The Dad's Army film was a hit, and by 1972, the TV series was still attracting huge audiences. The Magnificent Seven had become household names. For one member of the cast, the show's success rescued him from a lifetime of financial hardship. Arnold Ridley brought a kindly air to his portrayal of retired shop assistant Godfrey.
Mr. Godfrey's waking up.
Oh, hello. I must have dozed off for a moment.
Ridley's son Nicholas remembers the years before Dad's Army being a struggle.
He was a hugely successful playwright. He made a great deal of money as a playwright and managed to lose it all, which was, I think, unfortunate to say the least.
Ridley's best-known play, The Ghost Train, about a haunted railway station, was a huge hit in London's West End. But then he made a disastrous decision to go into the film business.
He became very interested in the movies and set up his own film company. Unfortunately, his backers went bust and he found that he was ruined. He had no money at all.
Arnold Ridley was forced to sell off the rights to some of his work to pay his debts.
Throughout my childhood, it was very much a hand-to-mouth existence, constantly worried about whether or not we could pay the gas or electricity bill or the rent.
Ridley's financial problems meant he had to keep working well into old age, despite still suffering from injuries he received fighting in the First World War.
I think everybody had a terrible time on the Western Front. I think it was horrific, really beyond words. He didn't talk about it very much, very little in fact. At the Battle of the Somme, he was wounded 3 times in hand-to-hand combat. He had a bayonet in the groin, he had a wound to his left hand, which meant that he could never use 3 fingers of his left hand. And he had shrapnel in his back, which troubled him all his life.
When he auditioned for the part of Private Godfrey at the age of 72, producer David Croft was worried the rigours of filming might prove too strenuous.
David said to him, well, you do know that this show will involve quite a lot of trotting about. Do you think you'll be up to trotting about? And my father said, well, I've survived 2 world wars. I think I can probably survive a television series.
Despite Croft's reservations, Ridley got the part, but allowances for his age were written into the script. He was excused carrying a rifle and made the platoon's medic, as this episode from Series 3 shows.
I never doubted you for a single minute.
Perhaps Godfrey could be our future medical orderly.
Good idea, Wilson. Thank you.
He didn't take full part in some of the more physical activities. It was after the episode Branded that he was excused the duty of carrying a rifle and was made first aid orderly, which was, I think, exceptionally kind and made life a lot easier on set.
The money he earned from Dad's army also made life a lot easier for Ridley and his family.
It was very tough, and it's very tough, I think, as a child to see your parents always anxious about money, which was very much my experience. And that, to some extent, came to an end with Dad's army. Not that it was brilliantly well paid or anything like that, but finally they had something like a regular income, and that made a huge difference to their lives. And I think Dad's army restored his self-confidence.
Coming up, the secrets of the Magnificent Seven's nights of partying.
They were very naughty boys and getting a lot drunker than they ought to have done and having a wonderful time.
And how Ian Lavender became the young star of the show and nailed one of Dad's army's greatest ever scenes, eventually.
Don't tell him, Pike. Pike.
It's a very difficult job, that, to play someone stupid but not be stupid yourself. You've got to tread a very fine line, and he did that very well.
In the summer of 1972, the cast and crew of Dad's Army made their regular trip to Norfolk to film the outdoor shots for Series 5. As this behind-the-scenes home movie footage shows, everyone was in a holiday mood.
There would be 2 buses going from Television Centre, and then also, obviously, the caravans for makeup and wardrobe for on location.
Sometimes we wives were invited to go, but that they loved it. We were all friends. It was like a family, and it was great fun.
The scenes being shot here were for an episode titled Brain vs. Brawn, which got Dad's Army's highest ever ratings of over 18.5 million viewers.
There we are, that's it. Let's go and help. No sign of any foreign body there. Turn the valve on, Frazer! What are you doing, maniac?
Occasionally, extras were needed for a scene, so a call went out to the local drama society. As its chairman, Keith Eldred was in charge of rounding up people keen to take part.
I was incredibly popular, because I think anybody in the town would like to have been in the show.
We did it for free to start off with, but I think by the time we'd gone colour, they persuaded the BBC to give them a small fee.
Away from set, the locals also enjoyed mixing with the Dad's Army cast. John Le Mesurier was particularly popular.
Drove him to a village, and he got out of the car, and suddenly a front door opened, and a lady shouted, "John, John, come and have a drink, you see." Well, John shot off to this house and wasn't seen for about another hour or so.
Le Mesurier wasn't the only Dad's Army star who enjoyed a drink. After filming, the whole cast usually retired to the hotel bar, a chance to cement friendships and put aside any rivalries.
Oh, of course, they all drank. They used to meet in the bar when they were rehearsing, and always have a good drink and a good drink and a good evening together. They were very naughty boys and getting a lot drunker than they ought to have done and having a wonderful time.
Keith Eldred remembers one late-night party that ended up in his house.
John the Mesurier decided to play the piano, which was a bit unfortunate because it was a very old piano, and he was very cross because it was out of tune. So I had to ply him with gin and tonics to keep him happy. The trouble was they all drank quite a lot. We very quickly ran out of drink and had to sort of send people off to the pub or wherever it was to provide more drinks for the party.
(1973) and the beginning of Series 6 saw the most famous scene in Dad's Army history, when the platoon have to guard the crew of a sunken German U-boat with hilarious consequences. It was also the making of the youngest of the seven, 27-year-old theatre school graduate Ian Lavender.
And when we win the war, you will be brought to account.
Right, what you like. You're not going to win this war.
Oh, yes, we are.
Oh, no, you're not.
Oh, yes, we are.
Whistle while you work. Hitler is at work. He's half army, so's his army. Whistle while you...
Your name will also go on the list. What is it?
Don't tell him, Pike.
Pike.
Half a century since it was filmed, Ian Lavender still remembers how difficult it was to keep a straight face when shooting the scene.
We never knew that was sort of going to go into the sort of folklore. To sit on top of that stepladder and try and keep my face straight, because even after a week's rehearsal and a day in the studio and asking David, please David, can you go somewhere else for the reaction shot? And David said to me, Ian, if I can go somewhere else, I will, but you'll have to tell me where it is. So, any ideas? And I said, no, I will do my best. And he cuts away just as my face starts to go into a terrible rictus of a smile. And I had to bite the inside of my mouth and drew blood to try not to laugh, because Arthur and Philip just made me laugh every time they did it.
It's a very difficult job, that, to play someone stupid but not be stupid yourself. You've got to tread a very fine line, and he did that very well.
Dad's Army creator Jimmy Perry originally based the character of mollycoddled teenager Pike on himself and his wartime experience in the Home Guard.
Jimmy Perry started out in the Home Guard as a teenager. His mother sent him out each evening with a scarf and usually with some hot soup. And one of the memories that Jimmy Perry used to write the characters was really of himself.
While the other members of the Magnificent Seven had long acting careers behind them, Ian Lavender was a relative newcomer when he was picked as Private Pike. As the youngest member of the cast, he relied on old hands like Arthur Lowe for advice as he revealed to Channel 5 chat show Five's Company.
So I hadn't got much to do in the first couple of series, and I remember Arthur saying to me at the end of the second series, saying, don't worry, I can't do his voice, but don't worry about the words, they'll come. Just get yourself a funny costume and stand near me.
No. Ian Lavender's a new boy, and they accepted him because, I mean, they'd all got careers behind them, hadn't they? And he said he learnt a lot from them. And he was quite close to John Laurie. They used to sit together and John would tell him all about his, Shakespearean roles and everything. And Ian would lap it up.
Coming up, cigarettes and alcohol, the dark side of Dad's Army and how tragedy threatened to bring it to a premature end.
We didn't think we'd get over it. We were very unsure about doing the next series without him.
In July 1973, filming Series 6 of Dad's Army was close to being completed when tragedy suddenly struck the cast. James Beck, who played Private Walker, was taken seriously ill after opening a school fete.
That was a terrible blow to the company because the character was such a wonderful character, lovely cheeky charm and so on.
Private Walker was the quintessential World War II spiv. He regularly got himself into trouble with Captain Mainwaring for supplying black market goods.
Psst, oi. I've got your cheese.
Come on.
I've got your cheese.
Come here.
Chairs. Yes. It isn't for me, of course.
No, of course not, no.
You know I don't approve of that sort of thing.
No, in that case, I'll take it back.
No.
Jimmy Perry had originally written Dad's Army and the part of Walker to give himself a role when he was struggling to get work.
Jimmy wanted to play the part of Walker, the Spiv, but unfortunately David Croft didn't agree. David wanted his co-writer to be in the production box, the control room with him.
He was furious when he was told by the BBC bosses that he couldn't play Walker because there would be too much resentment by the other actors, it was claimed, who they'd think he was giving the best lines to himself.
David Croft turned to James Beck, who'd ironically made a name for himself playing police officers in Z-Cars and Coronation Street.
James Beck had that charm about him and a certain kind of mischievous quality that David Croft recognised and thought that he'd be ideal to play the Spiv Private Walker.
Beck made the part of Wheeler Dealer Walker his own, as this classic clip shows.
No, Pike, no, don't do that, no. Hang on, we shall fix it. Look, get hold of that one, will you?
Come along, my little
Are you at the bottom of this, Walker? Yes, sir. You see, this friend of mine was a pigeon fancier. Only you don't fancy him no more. I thought you might be able to train them to take messages.
Where are they coming from?
From the boiler house next door.
Oh, this is too much.
Off-screen, father of three Beck lived life to excess. On-screen, he was a silver-tongued charmer, as shown in this clip with a young Wendy Richard.
Look, you going to give me a kiss or not?
Oh, yeah, well, I suppose so. I mean, I'm sitting here and I...
James Beck was also a heavy drinker and found a kindred spirit in John Le Mesurier.
They were renowned for going off and being big boozers, and they'd go and hang out at Ronnie Scott's and live the life and head into Soho, famous 60s Soho, and quite frankly have the time of their lives.
John and him used to come home from work every night and sit at the table and have a lovely evening. They were great friends, and he was a very naughty boy.
But James Beck's lifestyle eventually caught up with him. After being taken ill, he was rushed to hospital where he was diagnosed with pancreatitis. As Beck fought for his life, his character, Private Walker, had to be written out of the final episode of the series. This scene is an example of a moment of great comic acting, hiding the sadness of the entire cast.
It's one of the, I'm going to say sad, poignant. It's a sort of, moment. There's a letter on the floor.
Dear Cap, thanks for letting me off. Had to go up to the Smoke for a few days to do a deal.
They'd done a quick rewrite saying he's gone up to the Smoke, meaning to London. Got some business to do up there.
On the other hand, I may cop it for a bit under the odds, in which case I'll have to sweeten him with a monkey.
And I can remember seeing Clive's face just standing there. He suddenly wasn't Corporal Jones at all. Everyone was absolutely so upset.
How dare he try to bribe me?
Just 3 weeks after he was taken ill, James Beck passed away. At the age of just 44, he was the second youngest member of the cast.
I knew him quite well, actually, and it was very, very sad when he went. Far too young.
James Beck's premature death put the future of Dad's Army in doubt.
There were sad times along the way. The saddest, obviously, was the death of Jimmy Beck. And we didn't think we'd get over that, quite honestly. We were very unsure about doing the next series without him.
But Dad's Army did go on for another 3 series, which included some of its most well-known and loved episodes.
No alcoholic beverages will be sold without my permission.
No. That is undemocratic.
You, Frazer, will be in charge of all liquor permits.
I'm right behind you, Captain.
Right.
The Magnificent Seven were down to 6, and most were now well into old age.
What did you say, John? They don't like it up them, sir. They don't like it up them.
Worth a try, sir. After all, what have I got to lose?
For John Laurie, who played irascible Undertaker Private Frazer, achieving fame in his twilight years was bittersweet.
He once said to Jimmy Perry, "You know, Jimmy, it's an extraordinary thing. I played all the great classic roles at Stratford between the wars, and now I've become a household name doing this rubbish of yours."
Like the other older members of the cast, Laurie had seen real-life military service, spending World War I as a member of the Honourable Artillery Company. In the 1920s, he became a prolific Shakespearean actor. His roles included a critically acclaimed performance as Hamlet. His daughter Veronica says his passion was being on stage.
He was, I suppose, very fortunate to get onto the roster at the Stratford Shakespeare Company. And he certainly did enjoy it because it was a chance to play so many great parts, and he really had developed a great love of Shakespeare. I think theatre was his great love.
Laurie also worked with some of the greatest names in British film. Alfred Hitchcock cast him as a miserly crofter in his landmark 1935 movie, The 39 Steps. He brought out a dourness in the character that hinted at how he would play Private Frazer in Dad's Army.
Hurry up, don't let them catch you.
Red, I'll never forget you for doing this for me. Which way do I go?
I'll show you.
I might have known. Making love behind my back.
Get out, just a minute.
I and you two. Get out of my house before I...
Go.
I'll leave you like this, no fear.
It's your chance of liberty.
I think he was a great admirer of Hitchcock, who he regarded as a genius in a way.
During World War II, Laurie served in the Real Home Guard, perfect preparation for his role in Dad's Army. But when Croft and Perry offered him the part of Private Frazer, he was worried it would spell the end of his career as a serious actor.
When he was first approached and told about it, he said, "Oh no, that'll never go." No, I don't want to get involved in something that's never going to take off, and was fairly downbeat about the possibility of the whole thing being a success. But I think his agent persuaded him to take it.
Laurie finally accepted the part and became known for his famously pessimistic catchphrase, as shown in this classic 1972 episode.
In for trapped.
Aye. We're doomed. Doomed.
Everybody would always go, "We're doomed, we're doomed." But he was great. He had the most fantastic face that it sort of looked as if it was hewn from Scottish granite. You could smell the heather on him. He was absolutely brilliant.
In 1975, John Laurie was one of the few original cast members not to take part in a stage show version of Dad's Army.
One day, we were all summoned to Jimmy Perry's room, and he said, "Well, I've got some good news for you. We're going to do a stage show."
This rare behind-the-scenes footage shows the cast were all in high spirits.
When they did their stage show and when they were on tour, it was really pretty much like it was on location. It was one big family. They tended to socialise together, have meals together.
In this touching and little-seen footage of the show, John Le Mesurier demonstrates his talents as a singer.
The streets of town were paved with stars.
They all enjoyed it enormously, and during the season that he was there doing it,
he had to sing A Nightingale Sang in Berkeley Square, and there was never a dry eye in the theatre.
And as we kissed, said goodnight, a nightingale sang in Berkeley Square.
He loved doing it. He was a happy man then.
Coming up, as the cast of Dad's Army grew ever more frail, the end was in sight.
Everybody got really drunk and they all stood up and spoke their minds about it and moaned and groaned and had a laugh. And everybody staggered out, drunk as skunks, and it was the end of Dad's Army.
After 9 series and 80 episodes, in November 1977, the final instalment of Dad's Army aired on BBC One. Croft and Perry wanted to pay tribute to those who volunteered for the Home Guard during the war. So they took the decision to have the cast speak directly to camera. It worked perfectly.
Men who'll stand together when their country needs them.
Excuse me, sir, don't you think it might be a nice idea if we were to pay our tribute to them?
For once, Wilson, I agree with you. To Britain's Home Guard.
To Britain's Home Guard!
I think when they hold up their drinks and they toast the real Home Guards, it's a great moment. It's poignant and it feels pitch perfect. Love that.
Shortly after filming the final episode, the cast assembled for a gala dinner. Priscilla Dunn, wife of Clive, remembers the evening well.
When the company were finally gathered together and told that was the last series, that's it, we're not doing any more. And we're all having a lovely drink and rejoicing on what a wonderful success it has all been. And John Laurie stood up and said, a minute here, can I say something? Can I say something? And they said, yes. He said, we've been brought here to be told we're out of work. I don't see what we're celebrating. And all the other actors all laughed and laughed.
Everybody got really drunk and they all stood up and spoke their minds about it and moaned and groaned and had a laugh. And everybody staggered out, drunk as skunks, and it was the end of Dad's Army.
The evening marked the end of an era, and inevitably time was catching up with the elderly cast. Just 3 years later, John Laurie passed away at the age of 83. Arthur Lowe and Arnold Ridley would follow in the next few years.
My father used to read the Daily Telegraph, he said, for 3 reasons. One was the sports coverage, the second was theatre reviews, and the third was obituaries. And he used to say, I always read the obituaries first to see if I'm dead or not.
By the early 1980s, John Le Mesurier was also increasingly plagued by ill health. His heavy drinking had led to him developing cirrhosis of the liver.
He was a sick man, but he realised he had brought it on himself, if you don't mind saying so. In fact, his last words were, I'm fed up of it now, and he died that night.
Dad's Army's incredible success inspired a whole new generation of ensemble sitcoms, including 2 more iconic series written by Croft and Perry, It Ain't Half Hot Mom and Hi-de-Hi.
The partnership between David Croft and Jimmy Perry was something that just got stronger and stronger. If you look at Dad's Army and then It Ain't Half Hot Mum and then Hi-de-Hi, they were semi-autobiographical, that they did know about the Home Guard, that they did serve in the war in India, and then after the war they did both work in terms of seaside coastal clubs.
Today, Ian Lavender is the only surviving member of the Magnificent Seven. He's enjoyed a long career on stage and screen, including a stint as Derek Harkinson on EastEnders.
I haven't stopped working until I reached the age that John, Laurie and Arnold Ridley had reached when they started in Dad's army. It was all a bit of fun at the time, and we loved it.
50 years since it first hit our screens, Dad's Army is as loved as ever by the British public.
There's a brilliance there which is unsurpassed, and that combined with the situation and with the range of characters and with the comic spirit that's there, I think it's the reason why the show remains such a remarkable example of great entertainment.
For the cast and crew who worked on it for so many years, Dad's Army changed their lives.
If I go back to that first morning at Television Centre in Wood Lane, and you'd said that all this was going to happen, that all this had happened to me, that my life had happened because of it, it's not been bad. The mug's been full, of more than half full all the way along.
I feel very proud. Really, really very proud. Everybody that worked on it felt very proud.
It appeals to everybody, and it was a part of the time where everyone was working together, a part of England.
Charting his rise from Dublin bank clerk to national treasure here, Wogan Now You're Talking is brand new tonight at 9. Two Brits go head to head but face stiff competition as the heats continue in World's Strongest Man 2021. Next.